All right. Is there anybody out there? We're just getting warmed up here. We've got lots of stuff to talk about. So I'm going to see if anybody kind of jumps in here. If you're watching, if you're hanging out, please say hi. Let me know where you're from, all that good stuff. I'm going to just make a few adjustments to get this hopefully sounding good. And we can get on with it. We can get on with it. Check, check, check. I think we're doing pretty good there. Let me know if you guys have any problems hearing or seeing this. We just had looks like we got a storm going on outside and the power popped off for a minute there. So I hope that doesn't happen because that's going to shut down the whole thing here. So whether you're seeing this live right now as we're talking, or whether you're going to see this perhaps on a replay, my name is Jeff Marshall. I am a guitarist and a guitar instructor, and I've been doing this for many years. Taught for GIT and still do, and all kinds of stuff. So True Fire, got some True Fire lessons out there. And of course, I'm still out there on the road playing all the time. So, keeping it real. And I have a Patreon site, and if you're just seeing this on the replay, you can check that out. There's a link in the description. And normally what I do for my Patreons, or what I've been doing, all right, looks like we got some folks out there. What I've been doing for my Patreon folks is, recording a video and then editing it and sprucing it up and everything. And I decided I'm going to start doing more lives because I do have quite a few YouTube followers, and I appreciate that. So be able to throw them some nuggets with some lives. And if you're a guitar player, hopefully it'll help you out. But I currently have about 250 videos on my Patreon. I've been doing it ever since the pandemic. So we're coming in like 4 years now or something like that. So I got lots of stuff there. So you might want to check that out if you're a guitar player. So for this one here, this is going to be for my Tier 1. Now, Tier 1 is just a basic general information. Tier 2 gets a little more specified. Tier 3 more specified. Tier 4, so on and so forth. This is just going to be some general information. But I am going to have some PDFs and stuff included in that. So if you want to get that, you might want to check out the old Tier 1 of my Patreon site. So if you're here on the live, make sure you check in and say hi and let me know where you're from. And if you have any questions, I can certainly make this interactive, although I don't want it to go on forever. So I'm going to really get to some deep stuff here. Now, this is stuff that a lot of my Patreon I've gone over with before. And I kind of designed my Patreon to be almost like a mini school. We don't really get to, hey, Klaus, what's going on? All right, cool. We don't really get into too much stylistic things. Like we don't talk about certain players. I don't talk about Eddie Van Halen licks or, Randy Rhoads. You can get that anywhere. What I kind of deep dive into is a little bit of music theory, improv concepts, things like phrasing, triads, understanding music theory and how it applies to the guitar and getting it onto the guitar. So that's kind of the stuff that I like to focus on in my Patreon. So what we've been doing for the past few weeks in my Patreon is we've been just dissecting one of the major scale patterns from the CAGED system. And I've gone through different perspectives of that, even going into things like Lydian dominant mode and Mixolydian mode and just the major scale. But one thing I want to cover that I really haven't gotten, there's so much to cover with this stuff, it's really crazy, but is what we can do harmonically and how this stuff applies kind of harmonically, like, what are the chords in the key and where can we see them and how can we use them as arpeggios in our lines and how can we use them as just nice chord voicings and seeing everything within that pattern 1 box. So the pattern 1 box, let me just get in on my hands here a little bit. We've been working in the key of G. So pattern 1 in the key of G would look something like this in the CAGED system. It's the C shape. So it's just like taking a C cowboy chord, turning it into a bar chord, and moving it up until it becomes a G. So we got a G here, note here on the 10th fret of the A string, that's our root. And I'm just plugging in a C-shaped chord here. And we can learn all kinds of information around here. Like I've been going over things like the scales and the intervals and all kinds of stuff like that. But one thing I haven't gone over is the triad, the chords, the triad chords, and also the seventh chords. Now, this might be a review for some of my folks, but I think it's worth, before I move on to another pattern, I don't want to leave any stone unturned, so to speak, right? So what you want to also recognize before we get started is what is a chord scale. So if I go up here and I go, okay, if I'm in the key of G, I can build notes from each note of the, I can build chords from each note of the scale, right? So in this case, here's the notes that are in the scale. G, A, B, C, D, E, and I'm not too good on this whiteboard. So, and then F sharp is our seventh note of the scale. And we build chords off of each note of the scale. So we'll start with just triads. And what we get is with the one chord, we get a major, G major. The two chord would be A minor, three chord B minor, four chord C major, five chord D major, E minor for the sixth chord, and the seventh chord would be F sharp diminished. So what we want to do is see where these things are on the guitar and how they relate. So I got some diagrams here. So we're just going to start, and you notice up here it says it's going to be based off of pattern 1. So for our one chord, all right, if we go back here real quick, I'm trying to, there we go. Our one chord here is going to be the C shape. So that's going to be a pattern 1. And that's the C shape, right? So now if we go back to here, I'm just going to stick to this, make it easier. So we go here, we go, well, what does that chord look like? Okay, well, there's our root tone. It's on the 10th fret. It's like a C, right? There's our chord. And I'll make this the root. Okay, now right in this same position, this is the whole thing, is we're working inside of positions. We look at our 2 chord. Our 2 chord is A minor, all right? So we can play, now how this works is you actually work backwards down. So like you kind of work in this direction. So what comes before C, if we just kind of kept looping this, would be D. And so this A minor chord is a D-shaped chord, which would be a pattern 5. Now it's a minor, okay, it's a minor shape, so it's going to look like, here's A right here. Here's a D minor chord, right, just like a cowboy chord, D minor. Again, these are just triads. We're just starting with triads. So it's going to look like that, right in that same position without even moving. All right, so let's see where that is. That's going to be pattern 5. This is a D shape of A minor. We have an A note right here. All right, and we can play this, looks like a D minor. Let's make that the root. Okay, so there's our 2 chord right in the same position. All right, now if we continue on, if I switch back over here, I go 3 chord is B minor. See, we're just going to keep moving in this direction. So if we're kind of spelling the word caged backwards. So the B minor will now be an E shape, right? And that's a pattern 4, right? And if we go back here and we go, okay, right here is our B note, right? In that position, it's on the 7th fret. We can make a B minor like an E minor bar chord, right? Like that. And that's a pattern 4 shape, all right? Now, the only place where these shapes don't differ, or the pattern doesn't differ, is where there's a half step between the roots. So between B and C, there's a half step there. So this is going to remain a pattern 4, which is an E shape. But of course, the property of the chord changes to major. All right. Oops. Let's go here instead. And we've just got our good old-fashioned C major bar chord here. So we've got, so far we've got this. There's our G major. Here's our A minor, B minor. Here's our C major. Okay. D major, that's our 5 chord, right? Again, now there's no more half steps here, so we're going to just continue on. This will be a pattern 3. This is a G-shaped chord. You can see we're kind of working backwards, right? So we have a G-shaped D chord. Here's a D, and you know, if we kind of make like a G-shaped chord here, you've got a G in the form of a D. Now this is a hard chord to make, so what I like to do is I abbreviate it. Either play the lower part like this, or the top part. You can go for the whole thing if you want, but it's quite a handful, and it doesn't sound good enough for me to justify going for that whole chord. But it's good to know the whole shape anyway. All right, and then we're going to go back. Our next chord in our chord scale in the key of G is E minor. Right here we have an E, and this is going to look like an A minor chord, right? I'm going to set that as the root. You can see we've got an E minor here in the form like an A minor, right? We all know that cowboy chord, right? Okay, so the only kind of real tricky, weird one is the diminished shape here. And you know, we're just playing triads right now, so I'm gonna show you kind of a workaround here. We've got the root, the flat 5, and the flat 3, so that would, you kind of got to skip a string for this one. So that's kind of the way I would make it to stay in that position. All right, so there we go. We've got, in this position right here, we've got, and let me go back to this other screen here. We've got a G in the form of a C. Now we've got an A minor in form of a D minor. And then we have a B minor in the form of an E. And then we have a C major, also half step there, so form of an E major, bar chord. Then we have a G, our 5 chord, in the form of a G. Excuse me, our D is the 5 chord. I get these confused sometimes. And then our E minor is like an A minor. And then our B diminished. Now, this is actually coming from C, although it's kind of hard to recognize this. We'll see it a little bit more when we get into 7th chords, because that's where we're going to go next. However, before we do that, let me check in on the chat. Anybody in there that got any questions or anything? Does that make sense to everybody? It might be a bit to chew on, but the first thing you got to recognize is you need to understand this system right here. First of all, you got to understand how scales turn into chords, right? And then using the CAGED system, we can, see our chord scale. Here's the roots of the chords. Here's the property of the chords. And then the CAGED patterns here. Let me remove my little box here so you can see, like right here, and I'm actually going to go crazy here. I think I've got like a little fancy mouse pointer here. Let's see what that looks like. I don't know. Maybe not. Yeah, so, okay, you see this area right here. I'm just using this as a visual aid. I spelled out the word caged. I just labeled each pattern as 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So in this pattern right here, in the C shape, where we find our C shape G chord, we can find all the other chords in the key of G. Now, we don't have to play them all as chords. We could also play them as arpeggios, right? So we could play the G here, and then we could play the A minor, and then the B minor. Not my favorite one. The C major, the D major, the E minor, the F sharp diminished. It's a tricky one, and then, right? Now, you don't have to play the whole thing. Now, I could just play, maybe I'll just play 1 octave of each. I'll start with the G. I'll just play the first 3 notes, and then A minor, and then B minor, then C major, D major, E minor, F sharp diminished, back to another G major. Right? So I could incorporate those into my lines. The simple thing here is I have a scale pattern, right? But I want to see where all the chords are in this scale pattern. All the triad chords. And then I want to be able to play them maybe in little 1 octave shapes. Rearrange the order, or go up and down them. Just try to get some lines out of them. Now here's, the cool thing is that if you understand how modes work, you realize that the G major is also all of its modes, like A Dorian and B Phrygian and everything. So you can repurpose all this information to play as a mode too. So for example, I got a little A Dorian backing track here. Now A Dorian is really just G major. So if I play this G major scale, let me turn that down a smidge, we should be good. Right? But I could also play like, let me go a little closer on the hands here. So I'm just playing a G major scale. Of course, you could play A minor blues, right? But see, now I could start playing some of those triads. Inject some of those into my lines too. So that's more of a harmonic approach, right? So being able to see those chords allows me to do that. But, at the end of the day, you still want to be able to see the chord because you never know. You might be playing, maybe you can break things down into little string groups. You can say, I could play a G here, just a piece of this. Right, I can play G, then A minor, then B minor, then C major. You got a D. I can break these down into little string groups. And then just play little pieces of them in my rhythm guitar too. So there's so many uses for this. So again, I'm just kind of wrapping up a thing that I did here recently for my my Patreon gang there. And we've been really deep diving into this pattern. But one thing I kind of neglected a little bit was the chords. All right, so let's move on to seventh chords now. If I can find my next slide presentation here. All right, so let's see what we got here. I got so many of these. Like I said, I've been doing these for so long now. Okay, pattern 1 chord scale, got that. We did pattern 1. Oh, here we go, 7th chords. All right, I knew I had it somewhere. Okay, now if we go back to this other screen here. There we go. Let's try that, just so you can see my lovely face here. Now we can add a note to these chords. These are triad chords. We can make them 7th chords, right? So this would be a major 7th. This would be a minor 7th, minor 7th. This would be a major 7th. This would turn into a dominant 7th. This would be a minor 7. And this would now be a half diminished or a minor 7 flat 5. However, the patterns stay the same. So that means, now let's look at those chords as 7th chords. Let's start with our G. I would play it something like this. Basically, all we're doing is we're just lowering this root tone here. We're getting rid of it and creating a bar here. Now, I don't know why it's not letting me do that, but let me set the root here. And we would have something like this. G major 7. Now, every time I do these live streams, I run into some kind of weird problem with my setup here. Okay, let's go here now. And maybe it's this stupid mouse presentation I got going. I don't know. All right, so we had a triad, A minor, like a D minor triad, but we could play it like a 7th chord like this. So here's our 7th chord. All right, there's our 2 chord right in the same spot, A minor 7. G major 7, A minor 7. Now we would have B minor 7, and a lot of times most of us will play it something like this, where we just play, across like that. Then we would have a C major 7. This is coming from the E-shaped chord. Some people will call this a drop 3 voicing, however you want to describe it. I'm just thinking of how it applies to the CAGED system. Then we would have our D dominant 7. All right, this one's a tough one to play a big, huge voicing as. So what I would do is just truncate it a bit. So we just got the top strings here. There's our D7. E minor 7. Most of us know this guy by now. We can bar all this if we want to. All right. This next one most people don't probably use, but it is kind of useful. Basically, what you want to do is bar right here. And I think you want to bar this. Yeah, something like that. Wow, fancy. Here's our, so there's the root. Now, a lot of people will just go play it like the normal way, like this. But this way is easier to see the arpeggio that goes around it. Got to remember, my goal here is I'm trying to just stay in the same position. I'm trying to see all this information in the same position here, right? So if I go back to the old hands here, let's do that kind of. There's our G major 7th chord. Here is our triad, right? All we're going to do is pick up our middle finger, and we got a major 7th. Our 2 chord, here's our triad. We just lower that A down to G, it becomes a minor 7th. Some people bar that. Here's our B minor triad, but B minor 7 could be played like this. You could play it like this. I like doing this because it allows me to have fingers available to do some other things. C major 7, here's our C major triad, like an E shape. There's our C major 7th chord. Gonna get rid of some of that fuzz. All right, our D, here's our triad, or maybe the top part of it. Got to flat the 7 to get that dominant 7 in there. Here's our E minor 7. And then our F sharp minor 7 flat 5. And we're back to where we started. So, this is the thing is people will say, well, yeah, man, I know all my major scales. It's like, okay, well, how well do you know them? Do you know all the chords there too? Or do you just know the scale pattern? That's cool. It's a good start. That's actually pretty simple, though. So once I get the chords, I can learn the arpeggios around those chords. G major 7. And then A minor 7. And then B minor 7. Something like that. C major 7. Got all these right here. D dominant 7. E minor 7. F sharp minor 7 flat 5. And we're back to G. So now we have all the triad chords and all the triad arpeggios. We all have the 7th chords and all the 7th chord arpeggios. And we can copy and paste them over anything that applies to G harmony, right? Like A Dorian, like we were doing. That's the 2nd mode of G. So I can use any of these, right? Mix it up, mix some arpeggios, some triads, mix up some pentatonics, some blues lines, some scale lines. I mean, now the thing is like when you hear people describe music as a language, I agree with that. It's another form of communication, right? So, the more words that you learn, the more sentences you can speak. And the more things that you learn, the more eloquently you can speak, or, just expressive. You're just finding more ways to express yourself, right? So that's what all these little shapes do. You work up from the harmony. You see the chord, you see the arpeggio. Of course, the scale is actually kind of the easy part. You can use the scale to kind of connect some of these shapes. You can even start getting into some chromaticism because you can see the chords, and then you can make the chromaticism make more sense when you're doing it. So anybody else out there? Okay, any questions? So I don't want to stay in here for too long. Like I said, this is my Patreon tier 2 cats, and they're going to get these PDFs that I've been filling out here for you guys. If you want to get that, definitely check out my Patreon site. Got a lot of great stuff going on there, and I try to really keep up with it. But more lately, I've been doing some of these lives because I've also got some YouTube subscribers that, I want to say hi to and hang out with a bit too. So good stuff. Now let's say what else is G? Let's just for fun, let's pick something else that's G. Okay, how about D? I'm just typing D7 backing track. That's the 5 chord in the key of G, right? That would be like a D Mixolydian mode type sound, right? Let's see what we got here. We got something here like this, all right? Oh, I like that. Funky. Now, so most of us are going to go, we're going to go into something, remember, D Mixolydian is really G. So here's that G, right? Here's that scale. But now I can play some of those triads. Right? And I can inject those into some of my lines. So here's another thing to think about too is that every key center, like the key of G, for example, that we're working in has 3 minor chords in it, right? So in the key of G, we have an A minor chord, we have a B minor chord, and an E minor chord. You see, I can see those all right here, right? And I can use those pentatonic scales. There's A minor, here's B minor, and here's E minor. Now, when I use those pentatonic scales, doesn't matter which one, A minor, B minor, E minor, I don't leave the key of G. All those notes are in the key of G. So therefore, if G is also, the parent scale for D Mixolydian, I could play any one of those pentatonic scales over this too, right? So you see, it's like I could just play, pentatonic D major. Whoops. And that's cool. It sounds great. But it's not all the possibilities are there. So I want to explore all the different possibilities that are there. So I'm a big fan of working from the chord up, right? And it kind of all goes back to this right here, right? I see the chord scale. This is pretty common knowledge. This is like, street level music theory. Most musicians know this by now. But when you couple this with the CAGED system, you start to get all this information in one position. And that's where the magic of this system really comes alive. Because if you just go through it and just learn the pentatonic scales in the CAGED system, that's cool. It's a good start. But you got the deeper dive that you keep going, the more you're going to benefit from that information on that CAGED system. All right, so I'm going to hang out here. I'm looking at the live stream chat. I see Klaus is here. Let me know if anybody has any thoughts or questions, or if that went over your head. I've gone over this many times. It's always good to review this. Whether you've been playing for a year or 20 years, it's always good to kind of go back over this. And like I said, I've been doing for about the past month now, I've been doing a deep dive for my Patreon folks into pattern 1 of the major sounds, like, the major scale or the Mixolydian mode, the Lydian dominant mode. And one thing that I wanted to, and I didn't want to have to do a whole nother thing on, is I just wanted to go, well, let's make sure we know all the chords here too, right? That's really important because the chords will lead you to the arpeggios, right? And then if you understand that really G major, that's the key we're working in, is also A Dorian, it's also B Phrygian, it's also C Lydian. all these ideas, you can regurgitate them over those different sounds and use them in a modal context too, if that's your thing, you know what I mean? So, all right, I'm going to hang out for a second. Let me know if you have any thoughts or questions. Let's try another one. Okay, so here is the D7, right? Blending all those little ideas together, some triads, some arpeggios, some pentatonics, different pentatonic scales. Always kind of going back to my bass sound to make sure I reel it back in case it starts getting a little far out there a little bit. But you can always just reel it back in by going back into kind of a D major blues, if you will. Let's try it with another one. Let's see, another mode of G, right? Let's take C Lydian. I'm just typing in C Lydian backing track. I'm sure there'll be some kind of Joe Satriani spacey kind of thing that usually happens with this. But, so right here, let me get on my hands a little bit here. Oh. Some B minor pentatonic. Mix it with some C major pentatonic or A minor. How about E minor? I can see all that right here. I can see those pentatonic scales right here because I can see the chords, right? It's all about, here's A minor. Now A minor is also C major, right? E minor. E minor is also G major. B minor is also D major, right? So if you're more prone to play major pentatonics, you can use that. You can use major pentatonics instead of the minor. I lean a little bit more towards minor, but okay, I don't want to get too long-winded on this one, but that's how I wanted to finish off my Pattern 1 studies for my Patreon cats out there. So, when you actually comping, use these voicings. It's, hey, Jeff, great stuff. Man, I know if your fast chord changes. Okay, a couple questions. Great, I love questions. So Klaus says, when you're actually comping, would you necessarily use these voicings? Or is it a more visual aid for soloing? That's a great question. No name. Hey, Jeff, great stuff. May I know if in a fast chord key changing situation such as, I can't read that for some reason, there's something in the way there. How do you apply these shapes quickly? Okay, what I normally do, both of those questions are very similar. How are you going to use this in a rhythm, if you're using rhythm guitar? I'm kind of using these more in a lead guitar application, but how might you use these in a rhythm guitar application? Well, I like to break chords into string groups. So I would say on the top 3 strings, I could see the G here. And then I could see the E minor here, or excuse me, the A minor, the 2 chord here. And then I could see B minor here. These are little different inversions of the triad, but my mind and my eyes are referencing the bigger shape. So here's the big G chord here in the C shape. I can just see that. And then here's the A minor chord. In the D shape, I could just play that. And then here's B minor, so I could just play. And then here's C major, so I could just play. So I've got... Now D major, I could play maybe this. Again, if I want to stay in this position, maybe I'll play D like this. E minor would be here. All right. And then F sharp diminished. How would that look? There's different ways you could do that, I suppose. You could do something like that. I'd probably do it something like that. Maybe I get a little out of position, but it's hard to make that chord. You know what I mean? So I would truncate it down. And then you could do it on different string groups. So, you know, I could take this G here and play it like this. And then the A minor, I could play like that. And the B minor, I could play like that. C major, I could play like that. D, I could play like that. E minor. So that's how I do it in the context of rhythm guitar. A lot of times when I'm playing rhythm guitar, now I don't do a lot of solo gigs, right? So a lot of times when I'm playing rhythm guitar, most of the time it's in the context of a group, or at least with another musician. So a lot of time, you know, if it's another guitar player or a keyboard player where there's a lot of harmony going on there, I can get away with playing smaller chords. Do you know what I mean? Now here's the thing, is this is just one pattern. Once you get all of the patterns down, so there's 5 patterns, so that's just one of the 5. Then you have all these artistic choices, right? Because sometimes I like to play G major 7 here. I like to play it here. So I'm not regulating myself to this one pattern when I'm really playing. This is more exercise to really dissect and learn this particular pattern. So, you know, I'll play shapes that I like to play. Like, for example, if I play G major 7 here, and the next chord is A minor 7, that's not my favorite voicing for me personally. That's theoretically where it is in this spot here. But I might go for something that, you know, something that I physically like to play a little bit more, or that I think sounds better. And that's because I've already gone through and learned all of them in all the different shapes. So, you know, don't feel like you're, just because you're learning this one pattern, yeah, you want to work on this one for a while and, you know, get to know it and everything. But I'm not regulated to it out there in the real world. You know what I mean? Sometimes I like to play G major 7 like that, you know. So I've got all these options. We're just working in pattern 1. So in the real world, I wouldn't regulate myself to just only play in this one position. I want to play chords that I like the sound of, and that might be in a different physical shape or position on the guitar. So this is kind of more of an exercise. I think it's really great to know. But, you know, in the real world, I'm going to make choices based on what I want to hear. So I hope that makes sense. So, but if I really wanted to try to stay in this position, I would probably start to truncate the chords down a little bit. You know what I mean? Like I would play maybe my B minor. I could just play like one finger like that, or C major 7. You see, there's different ways to play these too. So like, for example, I could play C major 7 like this, but I got that little low, like boom. You hear that? Maybe I don't want that. So I could play it like that too, right? And that would, you know, maybe allow for some more sophisticated voicings to come in too. If I don't want this, I'll look for something on the higher strings too. So I'm not just regulating when I'm out there in the real world. I'm not just regulating myself to, I got to play in one position all night. You know what I mean? It can flow and I can make choices as I go. But the more I kind of lean into learning each pattern, all the possibilities there, the more options I have. So I hope that answers your question. But I appreciate that. All right, I don't want to keep this going on too long. Thanks for hanging out. My name's Jeff Marshall. I'll leave this up for a while. But if you want to get the PDFs and the shapes that I just outlined there, I'm going to put that on my Patreon first tier. If you want to check it out, support the channel, it's always appreciated. But I also do appreciate my YouTube subscribers. So thanks again, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.